Being the storyteller you are, you have a way of just bringing people in, and you share your personal history, coupled with, American Black history.
Mm.
So you do I believe you do a very good job at, bringing us into your world, and sharing those stories. When did
Mm.
you discover that storyteller in you?
I think, it starts with who you are as a child. I had a vivid imagination. Um, I think I started really writing when I became, like when I was coming of age, like 18. I started writing poetry and, love performance. And I actually moved from Southern California to Northern California because I was kind of following that drive to be a poet.
Mm.
And I had, learned of other poets and kind of a community of creatives in the Bay Area. And I wanted to be there, so
You wanted to be where it's
um,
happening.
yeah, I wanted to be a poet. And so that's how I thought of myself. And I just wrote, sort of like if you're learning music and you're self-taught. I felt like I was a self-taught poet, just following examples, like, the poets at that time, like Nikki Giovanni, and, you know, looking at those writers and kind of, I'd read something and then I would write something in response to it. That's how I
Mm.
really
Oh,
kind
okay.
of, I would get it. Like if you're listening to music and music emotes a certain thing, and then
Right.
you write something because you loved what that said or you're responding to it. And so I think I would buy books if I saw the face of a brown or Black or Asian person on a book of an anthology of poems, and I didn't know the poets. I would buy the book and read all the poems. And, when I open those books now, I see my notations, I see where I started a dialogue by writing my own poem in response to it,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where it really started. Just loving, when I was a child, I loved to read. I always loved movies. And when I was a child, I loved musicals, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm of the age where musicals were, you know, like, oh my God, like, okay, let me think. Mary Poppins. I want
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's what was available. And then those older ones, like for my mother's generation, like what Carmen, Porgy and Bess,
Mm-hmm.
all of those kind of musicals always intrigued me. So I've always been a child of the arts, and that's probably where that comes from.
Yeah. So you didn't just listen, or you didn't just, you took it in, but it prompts you to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have roots in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my
It's
mother was born there.
Mom's
Mm-hmm.
from South Carolina. And what part of
Right.
South Carolina?
Charleston.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's from an island that is also part of Charleston. That's called Young's Island.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's one of the barrier islands there.
Okay. So what was
Mm-hmm.
it like? Do you know what was it like for her?
I know a lot about what it was like for her because I'm always recording her stories and I'm always tapping into those stories. So, I spent time there when I was a small child. I, spent time away I was born in New York. So she would send my brother and I to down south to be with our cousins for a whole summer. And sometimes it was over, like, it could be over Christmas. We might be there longer than that. So it was for me. I mean, when my mother tells me what it was like, it definitely was a different way of life. But there is some romanticism about how they subsisted. All of their food came from the water. Because they eat seafood, a lot of seafood, fish. Um, or we say fush, and also they grew their own food. She told me about at a certain age to be So when you were growing up at that time, and maybe even a while after that, when Black children in on in those rural areas were going to schools, there were only like a couple schools. So there were like schools that were taught by teachers in like their homes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where there would be all grades taught together.
Taught
And
together.
mhm. And then at a certain age, if when you reach the age of high school, there wouldn't be a school that you could go to there. So you had to, their parents had to bargain with relatives or people that they trusted in town, which would be downtown Charleston area, to attend a school downtown Charleston. So
Mm-hmm.
that meant it was like it was like being in a boarding school in a way, because you would be sent to live with a family.
Okay.
So you'd live with a family, and my grandfather would pay for her room and board while she attended that school. And my mother was the oldest. So he'd pay for her room and board by bringing, um, we call it burlap sacks, we call them croaker sacks, full of crab and shrimp and fish to that home at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the week, you know, so there were ways to barter for her to be there.
To be there. And so, but was she still able to engage with her family, or was it just like
Oh,
she
yeah.
off? Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, Charleston's not, downtown Charleston is not that far away. It depends on where you live. But the fact that, you know, for her to be downtown and to enjoy the privilege of going to a better school, you
Mm-hmm.
know, you there, and she has cousins where certain cousins in the family would be selected, you know, like her first cousins might be selected to go live in town with a family because maybe they were seen as the ones who were the most intelligent or had the most potential.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of like emotional scarring around that, like people who felt like their families were giving them away or didn't want them, even though they're adults and they talk about it. I think it's so interesting that they don't have that. They still feel that way, that they were not valued, that they were sent away. Like on her uncle's side of the family, like, you know, her uncle had 12 kids, you
Mm-hmm.
know, so to send two of them away, maybe
Out
it
of the
eased,
12, yeah.
you know what I mean?
How
Like,
do you make that decision?
yeah, it's hard, you know. So, and you know, I guess it's no different than people who decide to send their kids to a good boarding school or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I thought about doing that with my youngest child, like sending her, I had made some good connections in Dakar, Senegal, because I was spending time there, going and coming. And I met other American women who lived there, who started living there because maybe they worked in the Peace Corps
Mm-hmm.
as young adults. They married, they had families, amazing stories. And a lot of them were from the Eastern Seaboard, like Maryland and DC and, you know, Virginia. Um, and they somehow share this history of, you know, study abroad or something that took them to West Africa. And so when I met them in Senegal, these different women, they were kind of their own kind of core community
They
support
had
for one
their own
another.
like tribe, like yeah.
Yeah, you know, and their children were the first truest African Americans I ever met.
Mm,
Truest, because they could have a conversation with you and I just like this,
okay.
and then they could speak three other languages, you
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
And so when I was around, their mother would say, just talk to Portia, just, you know, and I'd be like, I'm talking to my daughters, you know. So, but I
Mm-hmm.
think one of these women, she still has like a French American school that she started. And there would be children that would be sent there to study in her school. She had elementary, she had a middle school, and I think the middle and high school, she would sometimes have children who were the children of scholars or something who had been sent there for a semester or a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that would be a great opportunity for my youngest child, and she could learn French, um, and other languages. And I shared that with my mother, and she goes, oh, she was very upset that I would even think about sending my daughter over there and leaving her. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to kind of reframe that. And now I understand why, but sometimes I regret that I didn't do it, that I didn't take the chance to expose her to that opportunity in that way.
Yeah, you were like wanting for her to have that worldview education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And talking
To
about a
really,
world,
really experience it.
yeah, talking about a worldview education, you definitely have that in your travels. Like what led you to Senegal?
The first time I went to West Africa, I was still in grad school, and I was getting ready to go to a film festival that Africans across the diaspora attend. It's like the Con of West Africa, or the Con of Africa, and it's called FESPACO. And so I learned about that opportunity when I became really interested in African cinema when I was studying film. And somebody said, well, you should come. You have an opportunity to go. You just apply. So I did, and I was invited to come. And I had to pay for my own airfare and everything. It was like I went with other people from Oakland, like a couple other people traveled with me. But when we got to New York, where we were making we were meeting our international flight, there were all these filmmakers from all across the United States and other places that were taking those flights to go over there. So we chose an itinerary to go through Senegal. And then on the way back, we would come back through Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. And I didn't know much about Senegal, but one of my friends said, who was traveling, he worked for a company called California Newsreel, and they do film distribution. And so he said, why don't we go through Dakar and go to Gorée Island? And he says, do you know anything about that? I said, no, I don't know anything about Gorée Island. I didn't know anything about Senegal. And so he explained to me like that was a point of departure, like a slave castle, just like in Ghana, Elmina Castle and Cape Coast. So in Senegal, you have Gorée. And I said, I would love to, let's do that. So we signed up for that itinerary. So there were two. Some people went the other route. They went through Cote d'Ivoire, and maybe they came back through Senegal. I don't know. But we all traveled on that one, and we met up with others we were using one travel agent who was out of New York, who was an African guy, and he had set up everything. So he was working with other people out of DC who were also on the same itinerary.
Okay. Are you glad you chose that itinerary?
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
then the other thing is that I had only been here. No, wait a minute. The first time I went, I wasn't here yet. I was still in grad school. The second time I went, I was here. I was already hired. But one of those trips, was it the second trip? The first trip that I made there was the reason I ended up in Wisconsin, because I met Una and Iverson White. They were on the same trip. And he asked us, he taught at UW Milwaukee in the film school. And we were meeting other people, like it was a whole community of us, like from different parts of the US. And so we were showing each other work. We're at the festival. I didn't have work in the festival, but we had like what we called a video sidebar where we shared work with each other and talked about our work. And so I told him that my work was experimental, and he said, I don't think it's experimental at all. He still would say that, but it is experimental. But when they told me where they lived, and they said, and I didn't even know where Wisconsin was, to tell you the truth.
Really?
I
You
didn't know
had
anything. I really didn't know. And, so anyway, he said, they were talking, they said that it snowed in May sometimes. They were talking about how cold it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like sharing how cold it had gotten that year in California because it was 40 degrees and the puddles froze over and everybody else was from the West Coast, the East Coast, and they were like, "Are you kidding me? The puddles froze over."
That's nothing. Right.
you know?
Yeah.
But I left there thinking, I don't know how those people could live where they live. I
Mm.
I don't know how they could live in a situation where it'd be snow on the ground in May. I just don't know. And little did I know that Iverson would recommend me to his department because they had an opening.
Mm-hmm.
So I had just finished my grad program. I think I was in my last year of my grad program, and I was working in a library. And I got this phone call from UWM, and they asked if I would come out and teach a summer class. And I came out to teach that class. And I had another offer for a job that would have been more like a lecturer or adjunct in California
Mm-hmm.
at another school. And that dean, that was a Catholic college. I can't remember the name of it now, but she was in Milwaukee and she wanted to interview me because she was in Milwaukee for a conference at Marquette. So I didn't know I didn't know UWM was interested in hiring me past the summer. So
Mm-hmm.
when they learned that she was in town, they stepped up their game and they offered me the job.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really got to meet with her at all. And
Yeah.
then, so that, it's kind of kismet that I came out, I was here for 6 weeks. I had to go home and I had a month to get ready to come back. Because I think I taught from probably June into, or maybe it was like late June into late July. And then I went to a conference in between. And at the conference, they were sending, and this is before cell phones and everything, but they were leaving messages at the conference. They said, okay, check on this corkboard every day to see if you get any phone calls or whatever, And people were bringing me messages. This is from UWM. They want to know if you'll accept this, if you whatever contract. They were faxing stuff. I'm doing business. And then after the conference, I had to go home and pack up everything. I remember sitting my children down on our little love seat in the living room. The youngest was 5, getting ready to enter kindergarten, and the oldest was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat them down and I said, we're moving, And I remember the little one just looking curious until my oldest one started crying. And
Oh,
then they both started crying.
yeah. All at once.
They both started crying, but they
Yeah.
had been with me here for the summer and I liked it. I thought it was clean and I thought, there were parks and I love that there were parks in every neighborhood. And
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wanted to be someplace near the water, so.
It just happened to work out. So how were you documenting your experience in Senegal prior to, like what you do now? What was documenting looking like for you?
Videotape.
Mhm.
So I was probably working the first time I went to West Africa for FESPACO, and we're going for the festival, but you're spending time in Senegal. You're on a kind of tour circle. They're taking you around,
Mhm.
and so I had my camera. I had a Hi8 camera that I just purchased, a Sony Hi8 camera, and that was new technology.
Mm.
Because I was in film school, I shot film before that, so video became less expensive. And so I wanted that technology. And so
Mhm.
I remember purchasing my first used Sony camera. And when I got over there, it was acting up because of the heat, the humidity. And sometimes it would just shut off, and sometimes I'd be like holding it and praying that it would not shut off if I was recording something. I was talking to this machine, you know. So the first images that I shot over there were on high 8. And then as I continued to go, yeah, it was high 8. The very last time I went, it was mini DV, but that was still tape. It wasn't on yet a memory card.
Okay.
So the last time I was in, I'm not talking about Sierra Leone, but the last time I was in West Africa before I went to Sierra Leone at the end of 2019, I was still using tape, you know, so it was like the tape format had changed, you
So
know.
for people traveling to Africa, because a lot of people are interested to, going over to Africa to learn about, who they are and who they're connected to. You often hear that they say that you should start in West Africa. What are your thoughts as far as traveling to the continent?
Well, I think that I know a lot of people feel like Ghana is probably the first place you might go because of language. You
Mhm.
know, I didn't know any French, but I went to Senegal and I found that I could be there. You know, I felt like I could live in Senegal. And there's not just French, there's Wolof, you know, and I think the people are really warm. I felt a connection to Senegal, you know, um, to French Francophone West Africa. And maybe because I was exposed to it through these trips. When I went to Burkina Faso, that was also a Francophone country, you know. And I've been to Ghana, you know. So I
Mhm.
think it's more a thing of exposing yourself. Like now, a lot of people go to South Africa, which I haven't been to South Africa. I would love to go, you know. And I wanted to go to Sierra Leone, and that's why I kind of jumped on that in 2019 when I heard that there was a group going over from South Carolina. I wanted to go on that tour because it was focused on our Gullah Geechee identity.
Mhm.
You know, so there were 50 people on that tour. I don't know how it grew to be so large, but just about everyone who went, I knew, you know, from South Carolina, from St. Helena Island. You know, a lot of them were St. Helena Islanders. So a little further up from Charleston.
Okay.
So if you were a child and you watched Gullah Gullah Island, did you ever see that program?
Yes, I heard of that program.
Okay. So that family, they were on the trip. So
Re-
their children are young adults. So they're like, you know, I think the daughter is probably your peer, you know, and
Okay.
then the son, Simeon, and the father and the mother. And so they were on the trip. And then we had a lot of young people who were working as assistants to our chaperones. So
Mhm.
they were from Sierra Leone and they met us and they kind of accommodated us on the road, you know, where we spent a lot of time on the road. But back to your question, I think it's one of discovery. You have to go and you have to experience it because as an African filmmaker said to me on one of my first trip or my second trip, might have been my first trip to West Africa, where I thought I was going to be met at the airport by this one filmmaker that I bonded with. And he was very important. And I didn't realize how important he was, like the minister of culture. And he was the one who really extended the invitation, come to Fespaco, you know, and I could stay at their home, you know, and all of
Mhm.
that. And when I got to the airport, there was nobody to meet me. And all these other people who had an itinerary were going to a hotel.
Okay.
So it's like, oh my God, I panicked and I'm calling. So in my mind, I'm still using our American system like, well, why aren't they here? Well,
Mhm.
maybe I'll just call. And other people are like, well, it doesn't work that way over here. You just got to be patient, you know?
Mhm.
So I remember going to the hotel, giving up and going to the hotel with a group that was being picked up and taken to the main hotel at the time, which was Hotel Independence. And and there was a lot of traffic. You know, you're seeing filmmakers, you're seeing all the African
Mhm.
celebrities and the French and, you know, and the Americans and the people like Stan Nelson, who's a big time filmmaker, you know, like I had pictures of us all being in these spaces together,
Okay.
you know, and And I'm there and I'm sitting and I'm waiting and nothing is happening. And we had vouchers that were given to us. And so it was just like, I could write about that first experience. I wanted to come back home.
Just
I
that
was ready to give it up. Like,
yeah.
this is too stressful. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. And then I learned something about myself, not only about myself, but about us. Like, my American friends who had hotel rooms, they didn't offer me a place. You know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't say, why do you look so sad? Or why are you crying?
Yeah.
So it was one of the filmmakers that I had met in San Francisco, who was from Mali. And he had come over for a film festival. When I was a grad student, we did kind of like a what do you call it? Kind of like another film festival, because they were going to be in town. That's how I got to meet them. And we curated a program at our school. And I picked them up from the airport and I did all this stuff. And they were like, have you ever been to FESPACO? And I was like, no. And there was a language barrier too, because I didn't speak fluid French, and a couple of them didn't speak fluid English. But the one filmmaker who became like a big brother to me, he was from Mali. And he was the one who called me after leaving San Francisco and said, you should really come to FESPACO, because he told me other people I knew were coming. Okay. And so I'm sitting in the lobby, I'm looking all forlorn, and he saw me and he walked up to me and says, what is wrong? And I told him, I said, there's no place, and so he went over and he talked to the people and he said, she needs, a place. Well, we offered her a place, they said. And the place they offered me it was like some little dinky, it looked like a motel. It looked like a roach motel. It was not in the Independence. It was like this little somewhere else. There were several hotels that people could stay at, but
so you wasn't going for that.
No sheets. I told the driver, I said, wait for me, because I want to go see. When I was with everybody else, when they were being dropped off different places, I said, I'm going to go see. And I went and saw that bed had no sheets on it. No, it was like, no, I'm not staying there.
Yeah.
So I think about like our privilege, all the things, the fears. And so he arranged for me to stay at the Army base until he could connect. He explained to me that my host was very busy, was the Minister of Culture, and there are all these things that were being planned for this festival, and that he probably could not get to me that first day. So he arranged for me to stay on an Army base, right? And when I woke up on the military base, and so that next morning when I woke up, I don't think I slept all night. I was sitting there, every little sound I heard, I'm thinking, what is that in the air conditioner rattling around? What is, like, I don't think I slept. I sat on the edge of my bed and I told myself in the morning, I'm going to get me a ticket back to New York City and I'll spend time with my cousins. I'm not staying here. But everything shifted the next day, So, long story short, I returned to Burkina Faso, a few more times. I went to the festival, was happening every other year, and I went for a while through probably 1997. I think it was every other year. And then I started going to Senegal more. There was a whole summer when I spent there with I went to Burkina Faso and Senegal, and I was there for the entire summer with my children.
And you never thought about settling there?
I did.
Okay.
I did. But again, there's that image of like being too far away from family. As my mother was aging, I was like thinking, what if something should happen? On one of my trips, she was having surgery for colon cancer.
Okay.
And I was communicating with her from over there, but it was on my mind the whole time.
Yeah.
So I started to think, well, I don't know, that should be, and then another trip, my daughter was in college. And I thought, my oldest daughter was in college, and I was like, what if something, should happen? So I think that those are the kind of obstructions that we meet,
Mm-hmm.
but there are people who are definitely, I see that more and more. There's a whole community on Facebook of African Americans who are exiles, by choice, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think about that. And I also think about the fact that when I was in grad school getting ready to move here, I remember my mother and I went to a meeting in San Francisco for Peace Corps. And at that time in her life, she probably was just about going to become 70. And she was kind of exploring that idea of travel, or, exploring this idea of being in the Peace Corps.
Hmm.
Right. And now as I'm, mid 60s, I can see where that was coming from. Like at the time it seemed abstract, but I wanted to support her idea.
Mm-hmm.
She probably didn't share that with my brother, but she and I went to this meeting, and but it was a desire that she had. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I've spent time in West Africa, I did meet a woman one time, an African American woman who was in the Peace Corps, and she was living on Gore, and we became really good friends. And she was at the time the oldest Peace Corps person.
Hmm.
But you got to think about like your health or what you're capable of doing. Because as my friend, as I said, getting back to my friend from Mali, when he helped me get settled, he looked at me and he says, Portia, Africa is hard. I'll never forget those words. Like,
Really, Africa
Africa
is
is hard,
okay. Yeah,
like
and
it
that's
was just
interesting that
like,
you would say that because a lot of people are considering moving there, or they have already moved there.
yeah,
Um,
it's
but it's
not this.
hard. It's different.
It's not this,
Yeah, it's different.
yeah.
What are some of the differences? What are some of the major differences that would cause an American to say,
Well, the conveniences of plumbing. I
yeah,
mean, you can have a fancy home. I know people who have fancy homes over there,
mm-hmm,
but I guarantee you there's always a plumbing problem
mm-hmm,
in every home. And and some of the women I met, they lived well. They lived well. They had maids, but there was always a bathroom that didn't work well, or there was, don't use this toilet. You know what I mean? So there's always that. And I think it's just a cultural adjustment. I wanted to tell a story of a couple of these women that I met there, because they shared stories of being in their 20s and moving there, and how they first came over and they would dress in jeans, or they had to learn to uh, blend in. They had to learn the norms of the ways of women in that environment. If
mm-hmm.
you're walking, if I'm walking through Senegal, people can tell I'm a foreigner by the way I walk.
Just that simple.
Yeah. The women, they're like very feminine, like they just kind of, it's just a whole different,
Mm-hmm.
they're always aware of their femininity, like
Yeah.
where
Well,
we're
you
like
should
trying to
have
get
the
from
walk
place
by
to
now,
place.
right? You've been there hundreds of times. You should have the walk by now.
Oh, no, no. I mean, it's just kind of, it's part of the culture. You learn it. It's just like we learn certain things here. I think that going to Africa really, and not just to Africa, because I spent time in Jamaica in the past as a younger person. It really taught me about Jamaica, really taught me about Africa.
Mm.
But it also, going to Jamaica also taught me to appreciate my Gullah Geechee roots
Yeah.
more. Like I didn't know anything about, like, I didn't even at that point in time in my my early 20s, I didn't think about those connections across the diaspora. I wasn't thinking about it in that way. But I always seemed to find myself in communities of people who were from other places.
Other places. Yeah.
I had two very good friends who were they came to California from France, but one was from, his family was from Cameroon, but lived in Paris.
Mm.
And his best friend was from Martinique and lived in Paris. So they were like best friends, and they came to America, and through them, I learned about African culture,
Yeah.
So, and then being in the Bay Area has a large a Jamaican West Indian community,
Yeah. The
you
Bay
know.
is pretty very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, so that was my environment, and I kind of lived in that world. Like I remember when uh, people I knew would come to my house for parties, and we might play R&B or whatever, whatever was popular at the time. And then there would be a shift, and there would be a DJ there, and he'd start playing reggae and dub. And they
Really.
were like, my American friends would leave. Like, what is that? Like, like this
Right. Like,
is,
this is my cue to leave.
yeah, like we don't get this. We're leaving. They would feel like fish out of water, but that was, my exposure. I had a roommate who was from Jamaica, is from Jamaica, and we just had a good time. She taught me a lot about Jamaican culture, everything, so I appreciate it. I feel like she's like a sister to me. So learning about that culture, I just felt really connected to it. And then as I've gotten to know and reconnect with my, cultural roots in South Carolina, there's not much difference to, we were moved around
Yeah.
from through the Middle Passage. Some owners, enslavers had, stolen Africans that they took from place to place, so we have a sister connection with Bermuda or Barbados. And we can see it, So the first time I went to Barbados, I went with a boyfriend and his family or something. And I remember we went to connect with a family member they had there, a distant cousin that they had been told about. And so the person picked us up and took us to his aunt's house. And we get to the aunt's house, and she lived on a farm. And she had this basket full of peas that she was shelling from her. An older lady, she was shelling her peas. And in the living room, she had this big basket.
Okay.
And I was just like, this is awesome. And they were like, we're so sorry. We apologize. Oh, like they were embarrassed,
Yeah.
you
And
know.
you were just amazed.
And I was like, that looks like the same kind of peas that we eat in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah. That's
So,
unique to have that connection. And I think, when we think about history and our Black history,
mhm,
as a Black, person, we're always searching. I think we're just always searching,
mhm,
for that
mhm,
connection. And once we have that, it just makes us feel at home. It's
yeah.
for you to go all the way to Barbados and hey, those are the same peas I eat.
Mhm,
It
mhm,
may
mhm.
you may make them a different way, but that's
Right.
still the same. That's
Yeah.
still the same.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
Jamaican food is basically the same. Like, maybe they call it rice and peas and we call it peas and rice, but it's
Hmm.
similar, you
Yeah.
know.
Hmm.
But the other thing is that the idea of finding home. So when I was going to Senegal and I felt comfortable there, and people would take us from place to place, the first time I went, they take you to Goree Island, and you have this emotional register because you're on that island, and they tell you the story of your people being deported. But your people could have been deported from uh, Bunce Island in Sierra Leone. Your people could have been deported from Ghana. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you're from there, but it's like as Americans coming to that place for the first time, that's a commodity, you know. So they'll say, "Oh, you belong to you're a pular," like almost like it's like saying you're biracial, or you belong to not the majority, but you belong to these marginalized people over here, something like that. And so then that seed is planted. And so you start to identify with the Fulani. Any place you go in Africa, West Africa, they'll say, oh, you're Fulani. They'll just kind of tag you with that. And now we have DNA. So it's different than just being told you're that, because then over time you're like, well, that doesn't mean that I am. Like, when I went to Mali, after spending a lot of time in Senegal, in Mali, I felt like I saw people who looked like us. Mm. They were a variety of, they were your shade, my shade. Like in Senegal, people are very, very dark, like blue, black. It was blue, black, beautiful. The first image I remember of being in Senegal is seeing people who look blue, black to me, but they'd have on bright colors, like, the cloth they wore. It was like they were walking pieces of art. And then the ground would be like this red or ochre color. So that just stood out even more to me. It was like watching a moving painting, And when I went to Mali, you see people of every shade, and then you realize that, there are different ethnic groups. People have moved across boundaries. You have the Gambia, you have Burkina, you're seeing, like a full canvas of everybody. And so for me there, I felt like, wow, I felt a spiritual connection to Mali. When I was there, it was like you'd be walking and you'd hear music that sounded very ancient. And then, so I felt like I was moving through the present and the past at the same time.
Interesting.
It was kind of a simultaneous thing, like this fluctuation between the ancient world and the present world.
Yeah.
Wow. And seeing that, I think you can experience that in any country in Africa. Mm-hmm. The other thing is all the assumptions we make of Africa. So like in Senegal was an easier place for me to be as a newbie because it was very cosmopolitan. You could be in a place like Dakar is very, like you'd feel like you were in New York. Like, there are moments I felt like, well, I can navigate this because this feels familiar. Mm-hmm. And go to New York now, go to Harlem, and you see Africans everywhere, so I'd walk down the street in Harlem, and that's where my family, many of my family members live. When I walk down the street and women pass me and they're dressed in, their boo-boos and, they have their gaylays on and they walk past me and I smell that scent that smells like incense.
Yeah, it just takes you back.
Snatches you back. Yeah. Like, oh, mm-hmm. I remember that. I have funny stories about like I rented a house and there was a maid that came. So when you rent the house for what the amount of time you're going to be there, it comes with a maid. Mm-hmm. So in this case, the maid had retired, but her two daughters were taking her place. I'm renting from, a family that's from Cape Verde, and they had this house. So I rented it, and every day the maids came to me and asking me in French, because they didn't speak any English, mm-hmm. what I wanted to eat. So I would always answer in a simple way, poisson et frites. I want fish and chips.
Okay.
So one day she came and said, don't you want anything else? And she started naming things of foods that I recognize the names of, like, and I said, sure, I like that. Super caña is like in South Carolina, we would call it okra soup. We make okra soup and we put, or gumbo. So you want super caña? Do you want this? Do you like this? Do you like that? I said, sure. They said, okay, give us. And they said a certain amount of money and we'll go to the market and buy these things. I really didn't need them to make that much food because I was staying by myself. Mm-hmm. And I was eating somewhere else. And I always had leftovers. But I was like, okay, sure. So I give them the money. Then I go meet my American friend, the one who owns the school. Her school is across the street. And I told her that the maids had asked me they were going to make super caña. She said, how much money? How much did you give them? And I told them, I think I gave them $40. She said, what? She said, my maid can make super kanya for the whole family, and we're 6 in our family for what did she say? For $10. We're gonna go over there. So she sensed that there was some swindling going on.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was another time that she came in.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. The sisterhood, like, we're gonna go over there. And then she and her daughter went. And at the time her daughter was like 18. And they came in like gangbusters, like
Okay.
and I saw the fingers wagging and I saw the heads. Like,
You knew it was over.
like, how dare you take advantage of
Yeah.
And then I heard the police are there. And all of a sudden I saw nervousness and everything. And so then we went for a couple more runs. And this story got around, not just to my American friends, but to the African family that I normally would stay with. And they were like, oh no. So they sent like one of their family members over to meet again. We're going to meet with these women, the landlord, and then my 2 friends. So the meeting comes up. When I get back, they had prepared all this food that I didn't ask for. They made a cake.
They just laid it out.
Yeah. It's a typical sister story. Like, they went to that store after that, and they didn't bring no change back, mind you. So they made all this stuff.
Wow.
And they went and got the best crab or the freshest fish, and they, all of this. And so we're having this discussion, and so it turned out that the culminating thing was there was a misunderstanding in language or something, but there really wasn't. We knew that, but they went, so the people who were there, like, it was almost like a kangaroo court. They're like, we want to taste this super kanya, because they said, oh, she told us to put this in it and to put that in it and to put that. They said, bring us a bowl of that super kanya. We're going to taste it. So everybody got their little sample. This is what I heard after this. Oh my God, this is the best super kanya I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm watching their faces and they're like, oh yeah, this is good super kanya.
Yeah, it was worth it.
They put their foot in that super kanya. Like, they probably would have never made it that good in the past,
Wow.
But that was a lesson. I was like, that's a short film.
Yeah, it is a short film. But also too, though, it says a lot about the hospitality. It says a lot about that. And how the village works and how they serve. Very much different from over here in America. But I do think that we try to do the best that we can to try to maintain that village. But it has over the years gotten away from us. Like, why do you think that has gotten away from us?
I don't know. I think it's a different world for us. Like, I think of my mother's generation, and I think also of my mother taking the risks that she took, because of her generation. Like, if I look at the cousins who stayed behind in South Carolina, they're the ones who have land, you know what I mean? They're the ones who inherited certain ways of living that is hard for us to recapture that, when you move that far away, and the connections that you lose. Because even when I started going back to South Carolina, and I'd say to my mother, you think you'd ever live there? She says, I don't know those people. That's how she put it, but after she started kind of revisiting with me and making reconnections, she was really, I could see that was really valuable, and for her to see me navigating the back roads, that impressed her. I'd say, Mommy, do you remember this or that? She goes, no, everything looks different and it's named differently now. And I say, have you ever been here? She goes, no, we wouldn't have been allowed to be on that side of a certain boulevard or
Mhm.
on the other side of King Street if you didn't have on a uniform. So I started learning. She would say, here's an address. If I call her and say, I'm downtown Charleston, she said, look up this address. She'd be looking for an address of a person she might have lived with when she was in school. And that street is named differently now, or I can't find the street. And
Mhm.
then I would, because I'm in the academic community, I might ask somebody, well, I'm looking for, I say, you can go in the archives and you can see how they rename streets, and streets are not as they were. So I
Mhm.
learned a lot about the history because she was always saying, go here, do this, go look for that. And I say, Mommy, there are no houses over here now. That's a parking garage,
Mhm.
or that's a part of College of Charleston. But what she was doing was making me aware of what was there before.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing, and it seems like that's always been there,
Mhm.
no, and so she said one of her uncles owned a cleaning business, a cleaners. And on that street, there was a little cleaners. So I wonder like how many different hands that cleaners went through, but it was
Mhm.
still existed, you
Yeah.
know. Um, so just that kind of memory and mapping
Right.
and
So you
gaining an
like you're
appreciation.
going through that and your mom is like, guiding you and it's taking you back and it's taking you back in time to, where she was. Like
Hmm.
how do you think how important do you think it is for today's generation to look back in time in order to understand today?
I think it's very important. I mean, I can ask students now, I've been teaching at UWM, this will be my 29th year.
Mm.
So I have students in my class who were not even born when I got here. You know what I'm saying? And so in order to tell a story about something or to show why a film was made and how it influenced other stories, like say films that are about Black history, that are about the Black Panther Party, to point them and say, okay, this story comes from these real events, so it's always important. Sometimes I'll just ask students, no matter, like I have now in my classes more students of color than I've ever had. I mean, when I first came here, I mean, everybody I had was a white boy and a few white girls, like, and if I had students of color, it was very few, you
Mhm.
know. So, baseball caps. And if I showed something they didn't like, they'd put their head down like this. They wouldn't even look at the screen. If
Mm.
there were Black images on the screen, they wouldn't even look at it. They didn't want to dialogue with me. They wouldn't look me in the eye. It was it was really something,
It was a tough
So
time.
it was pioneering, So now they got students who they can have they can go all the way through their college career in film and never have me as a teacher, but be a Black student. You know
Mm.
what I mean?
Mhm.
And so it is important. I ask all of them, regardless of who they are, what they know about their family's histories. Like, where do you come from? My mom is from Wisconsin. Where? They say everybody's from Wisconsin. So, but where was your grandmother from? Where was? I have
Mhm.
to take them that route to. I think she's from. I said, we'll find out.
Yeah.
So before we can have conversations, sometimes, especially in a class like Multicultural America,
Mhm.
I want them to understand who they are before we start looking at who others are. You
Mm.
know,
Say that again.
I want them to understand who they are before they start looking at who others are,
Mhm.
you know. So it's been an experience. I mean, I didn't think I would end up being a professor teaching film. It was a way to feed my children and to have insurance at the time. Who knew? I mean, I was in an arts program. I thought I would just be an artist,
Mm.
you know. So even that, like sometimes I look at who is there now, who's coming in,
Mhm.
and I see I because I'm the oldest now, like
Mhm.
all of the ones who were my seniors have retired, right? So this is the second year of me being the oldest in the department. And I'm looking and I'm seeing certain things kind of loop back around. The way people are hired, the way they're promoted,
Mhm.
um, how they look out for each other. They look out for each other, and I can see there's an agreement. I can see it, but you can't like put your finger on it.
Can't pinpoint it. Yeah.
Like every time an opportunity comes up, that same person says that other person's name all the time because they already have a plan. They already have a plan for them, or I'm looking and when did that person get here? Oh, okay. Like I'm an executive committee person, but I never knew about that. You know what I mean? So their rules are different, and they are privileged to have learned to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
So they automatically know how to administrate. That's nothing I was ever interested in.
Yeah.
So they can handle 5 administrative situations and teach and make their work.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I'm like, I can't do that because I'm doing this over here right now. You don't understand.
Yeah. So
this takes all of me.
Laser focused on this right here.
And they're like, oh no. And then they're building Excel sheets and charts and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God. Like,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
That's it's like they think like it's like a corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a corporate environment, and Black faculty in any discipline, we all struggle with the same old, like, and you can talk to each other about it until you're blue in the face. And some do better than others, but I look now and I see younger people who are entering academia, especially the ones as artists, like if they're good, they learn early. Like now, I think they should learn how to negotiate. Mm-hmm. I was just happy to have a job.
Yeah.
And I think about all the money they saved probably when they hired me,
Right.
I see people coming in now and they're like, well, I need this and I need that. And I need, and they get that, so. And it's a different world.
Nation to be able to say, hey, I'm going to negotiate, versus back in your time, you weren't thinking about negotiating anything. You just wanted to secure a job.
Mm-hmm. So I was happy that we had dental insurance. You know what I mean? I was like thinking before this, and I was working a part-time job and like 3 libraries or something. I do feel like I feel fortunate that the kinds of jobs I've had were creative jobs, because I did work in radio. I feel like my mission was to, once you kind of know yourself, that's your path.
Yeah. And I feel like that's like the story of your life of just, you took hold very quickly of what your passion was, and you just flowed in it. You just flowed in it. Like that's your path. That's your story. Yeah. And I love the way that you're able to share that with us, coupled with like your family story, that deep-rooted history in South Carolina. Like you just have a way of bringing it all together. And that's the beauty of being an artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like that. Mm-hmm.
Like my brother became a lawyer, and I remember I had a part-time job and I was working for a law firm, and it was a maritime law firm, and I was a receptionist, and I would sit at the typewriter and type poetry all day long. I just remember that. And I remember him saying to me, because he was in law school at the time at Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco, and he said, well, you need to become a lawyer. And I said, no, that's what you need to do. And when he was telling me that, well, it was like 21. I was like, no, you be the lawyer. I know what I need to do. Like that's your path. It's not mine. Mm-hmm. And I saw the stress that it caused him. Like I remember the first year he was in law school, and I went to his apartment, and I think he was supposed to be studying. And my brother is somebody who always kept it together, but he did not look like he had it together. He looked like he was really stressed out at that point in time, you know. And I still remember that visual of him like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, he's not doing so well. He's struggling. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
that visual, you carried that with you.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
remembered that. Like that wasn't an easy thing to do, but he felt he needed to do it. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so I, in that way, it just kind of really underscores that I followed what I was supposed to follow. You
Right.
know,
As they say, like you just marched to the beat of your own drum.
that's right. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, you
so I
did.
can look back, like even as an artist, sometimes I think, well, maybe I should have done this too, or wow, you know, now people have so many different avenues they can, you know, like, oh my God, people who are interested in water could be water biologists or whatever they become.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have all of those choices, you know, like in school. And so latching on to film, and even now I look back and I go, I didn't learn enough
Okay.
in that particular film school. Like what students are learning now and the language they speak about film, and I'm learning from them. Like I'll say, what camera did you use, and what and what microphone, and I'm asking them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as I'm teaching them. I'm like, okay, I'm looking at, and so what did you use and how did you use it, you know, and
Yeah,
I'm keeping my little notes because I always have to. Technology has changed so much,
it changes
you
consistently.
know, so yeah. So, you know, with the technology always changing, I'm not getting any younger. If you're not out there making work all the time, you always have to, uh, you know, keep your chops up. You
Mm-hmm.
have to, or you have to pivot. And I think I'm pivoting in some ways. I'm really more interested in not seeing my work necessarily on the big screen. I've never been that person. I've never, oh, I want to make a feature film. But I, you know, I have people in my peer group and that's what they learned and that's what they do.
Okay.
And it's not easy, but they have the tools. They learned to do that a long time ago, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
But I
to
do
build a
believe you
crew.
were able to, and still are to this day, as an example for generations that follow under you, to be an example of being free in your, in your career and making that choice to, this is what freedom looks like for me. So
Hmm.
thinking about that, like, what do you think that means to be free? Um,
Uh,
not
I don't know.
not politically, but just as relates to you as an artist and as a Black person as an artist.
Well, I think that I look back at the privilege I have of, like Bob Marley says this, there are no chains around my feet, but still I'm not free,
Mm-hmm.
in one of his songs. And yeah, I think that there's a certain level of freedom. I'm glad that I don't work in a factory somewhere because I have to, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what freedom will look like once I retire. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how free I can actually be because then it's more like, well, if I'm not getting the same salary because you know what I'm saying? Like it's a different level of, well, how much is your pension going to cover? Or how much longer are you, as a Black person, we have these things we have to think about, you
Yeah.
know? So I don't, I don't know if I don't want to say freedom is overrated because I think that to some degree, you know, we're never really free because we have to depend on uh, a living, we have to depend on having health care, all of these questions that are, it is a political thing. It is everything that we've talked about regarding reparations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the ones who are coming in the door now who are not Black, not brown, they've come with endowments. You know, like I understand by the way they move, whether they're artists or not, that they've had choices all along that I didn't know were there for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So I look back and I go, wow, if I had known to use that language, maybe this would have happened. Or, but I see them and they can navigate in ways that I still can't. So I don't really see myself as being free. What I do see is and appreciate is that I can live as an artist and that there's value and there's commodity in that I create for myself or create through a community of other artists or people who appreciate the arts. And I have to say, last year was a good year for me financially, because things for us increased if you could be virtual, like, um, and for some people, yeah, and because I still, have a full-time job, but my summers have always been difficult, like, oh, how am I gonna, oh, because they only pay us for 9 months and then you gotta swim the rest of the way. You gotta, so money was always for me an issue, always. My mother worked hard. My mother worked as a maid and then later in life went back to school to receive her bachelor's, but her life has been taken care of and learning to, thank you, take care of other people because she did that well. And that was a way of living and surviving.
Having been someone from a generation who worked as a domestic and later realized, a degree during empty nest after we'd all left home. Um, and then me coming from that generation and realizing the value of having a job stayed on mine, you know. But the value really is in realizing for younger people, I see them realizing their own independence through entrepreneurship. My daughter, um, you, Natalie, I see people building that model of independence. Not all of us had those models growing up of seeing someone being able to be self sustaining, but I see more examples of that now. So I guess my acknowledgement is of young women like yourself becoming more entrepreneurial, and that is something that I see being realized, and I admire that. Thank you.